you haven't played this game yet, I'd recommend going to the description and downloading it, because this video has spoilers for the solution to this game.
I've kind of given this a couple of days to just sit with it and figure out what I want to do. The theme's evaluate, but that's kind of like an interesting one. I feel like there's a lot that you can do with that. My first thought was maybe doing something with like an abacus, just doing like a 3D model, and then just having something that's very small, specific, and tactile. And I guess adding some elements of like play and game into it. I was also thinking maybe just like an accountant, like little accounting simulator, a performance review. I don't know, evaluate's kind of a weird one. But I think what I'm kind of liking at the moment is maybe just doing a 3D model, but it's like an evaluation machine. It's just this model that hangs out in 3D space. I've worked with this sort of style before. I made a puzzle game with a friend of mine, which is essentially the sort of aesthetic that I'm going for. The idea is to basically just incorporate all of the elements I've thought of already. Maybe there's like a side that's a calculator, and it's essentially just like a puzzle box with a whole bunch of challenges that you have to do to get through it. I'm kind of thinking like keep talking and nobody explodes sort of vibes, but then not cooperative. I think that's a good start. I think that's a good place to bounce off and springboard and see how we go. At this point, it's Thursday already, so when I do this, there's no turning back. And I'm glad that I took a bit more time to think about it this week. But heck, if it doesn't work, it is not going to work. And I can't do anything about that except try and make it better. I went a little bit more technical this week and decided to work with non-Euclidean geometry. Euclidean geometry is basically just shapes that exist in the real world. Like, they're realistic shapes, they have physical dimensions that make sense. And when we're talking about non-Euclidean geometry, that's basically, think about like the TARDIS from Doctor Who. I think that's a really good example where it's just a lot bigger on the inside than it is on the outside. So it took me a little while to get this set up, but basically the way that it works is I've got 6 cameras, 6 cubes, and each of these cameras is projecting onto one plane on this main cube with the main camera here that renders the output that's shown over here. Gosh, I can't even remember how I've set this up properly. But essentially there's 6 cubes, each have a hole in the base. I've overcomplicated it a little bit, so if one of the other cubes ends up in front of the wrong camera, you don't see it at all anyway. Kind of technical. Lots of different weird stuff. Definitely took me a little bit longer than I would have hoped to get this all working in the way that I wanted it to. So this is when I finally got one of the faces to work properly, and it actually started to project in a way that looks like it should, and all of the cubes are rotating properly. Well, at least one of them is. And now we've got them all working. I don't know if this is exactly the look I was hoping to get out of it. It doesn't look as big on the inside as... It's not as noticeable as I'd like it to have been. But like, I think it's still pretty cool. I think there's a lot of potential here. I don't know how this is going to tie into Evaluate at all, but we can worry about that later. I've added some little screens on top of each of the openings on the cubes, and I'm just testing out what it looks like. Basically, I've set it up so that if you're looking at a side, it will recognize what side you're looking at and activate the screen. And I've got these little, like, 6 degrees of rotation to play with that I've added on. I don't know why, just because there's 6 degrees where you can rotate into a new face and you don't realize that that face is open or closed yet. It just means that you don't have to be exactly bang on center to count as one of the other faces not being active. I don't know if that makes sense. So if you're not looking at a face, it's just going to be open and you can look into it. And if that face is being shown on the main camera, then it's going to be covered. It's just a test. I don't know. I made a little keypad. It's built and modeled entirely in Unity out of cubes and text boxes. Super rudimentary. It doesn't have any animations when you get things right. I think that adds like a little element of confusion, which isn't bad for a puzzle game sometimes, although I don't know if it works really. But it's cool. It exists as a thing. Super basic, super simple. I love him. I added in these little like numbers as the keypad numbers to put in. And then there's like a little hint box out here, and I'm gonna like randomize this every time. that it exists, that the keypad needs to get launched. It's basically just like you look at the numbers here, you find the corresponding spots, and then you enter the order that it's in. The next thing that I did was I added in these like letters. Looking back at it, it doesn't really make for like fun gameplay, but I thought it'd be like a cool concept that if you rotate the cube, that it adds like 1 to the letter, and if you rotate it the other way, it goes back the other way, and essentially the goal is just to get to this letter that's shown on the other side. But what ends up happening is just kind of this really boring bit where you just have to wait for the cube to spin a lot, and I could balance it so that it's a bit more fun, but that takes way too much time. Adding polish to Gamer Weeks is not that much of a vibe. I bought this really cool little model pack a while back, and I just really like the aesthetic. So I just kind of grabbed a couple of these worlds because I didn't know the direction to go in after that. And I just threw them in the cube because that's spacious. Worlds are full of space and things that take up space. So this is what it looks like when it's in the game. You can pick them up and look at them and rotate them in a little bit. I added the same rotation script to the keypad as well, just to add like a bit of depth and feedback. I basically just added one of these worlds into every single one of the cubes. You can see them all here. I thought it'd be kind of cool to put like this moon one upside down, because I feel like that kind of makes a little bit sense, and it made sense for the Arctic one to go at the top. That's about as much thought as I put into this whole mechanic. At this point, I had no idea what I should do and what the direction of this game should be going. So I Googled evaluate and decided to figure out what would be good. And then I came across judge, which is great. So I made it that when you click on a world now, you need to give it a score because you judge it. And you get a nice little fun animation. And I don't know why, but I thought, let's just put the score that you gave it on the outside of the cube. That's a thing that somehow makes sense. Yeah, if you do it really quickly, you don't get to see the animation for that one. And after all that, I was like, okay, let's try and play with the space a little bit more. And I wanted to make it so that when you got perfectly looking at the center, that the cube would fill out the space that it is. But that only works if you're moving in one direction along this way. And when you do this, it becomes really noticeable that you change it over. At this point, I had no idea what to do. The whole project was becoming incredibly messy. I have 18 scripts and they are all very poorly written. My hierarchy is an absolute mess. It is just so janky, and it just became really hard to work on this without refactoring anything. So I was just like, let's try and add some elements in that work. I needed to figure out how to finish the game still. So what I did was I added in a crack, this thing, and was like, cool, if you click on this, you restart the game. And then I added in some animations that make it look nice, except of course I didn't reset the rotation on the projected cube, so it looks a little funky sometimes. Finally, to add a bit more game to it and to add a level of replayability, I added in a little timer that will activate if you finish it once, and you can try and beat the high score. Because why not? Why not? There's definitely a couple things that I shouldn't have done. I shouldn't have changed it so that all of these cubes have a different tag, which means that only the camera that's looking at it can look at it until the very end or something. Just because every time I add in a new object, it makes it a real pain. Adding in the next element just took way too long, and I would have to just constantly go in and change these tags. And then I had a couple extra ones that just did stuff. I won't go into the scripting too much because I know that that's not super interesting, but heck, I'm glad that it's not interesting because I do not want to show these. These are just abysmal. This thing, this monster, essentially just runs all the stages of the game and it is so impractical and so inefficient and so difficult to change anything that it's just become a nightmare to work with. I'm glad that I'm only doing it for a week, because I'd spend another 2 weeks just refactoring this and making sure that it is workable. Overall, I'm pretty happy with how this week turned out. From a technical standpoint, it's really nice. I think from a game design standpoint, it's really not nice. I think using this sort of style and format for things in the future will be really good. I think it will make for some interesting stuff. I just don't think it's super functional for the sort of thing that I was doing. I don't know if I really used Evaluate in the way that I should have. I think if I had have made an accounting simulator or something like that, that would have been more in line with Evaluate. I think the keypad was me trying to include like a calculator, and I forgot, and it became a keypad. Next week's theme is going to be Gate, which I think is going to be a fun one. I already have lots of ideas about what I'm going to do for that. Thanks for watching this week. It's been wonderful to have you on board this horrible mess of a game, but I hope that you found at least some sort of enjoyment in watching this and playing this. I'll see you in the next one. If you're wondering why this setup is so tight, it's usually because I work on an ultra-wide monitor and I just scale it down for recording. It's not this confusing and messy normally.